chariots and boats, men and women, hearts and minds, clocks, rockets to the moon, but not the sun or clouds, the seas or seasons, the making of histories, the unfolding of known and unknown galaxies. Welcome. Slow down. No racing. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in to the 53rd show in this ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from Shelter Harbor, from the well-weathered coast of Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. Last week, we explored the ways and wilds of the heart. This week, I'm inviting you to view time through other lenses, different prisms, and to seek to experience it more multidimensionally instead of linearly, which, as many creators now and through history knew, are extraordinary, expansive dimensions untethered to clock or calendar time. The title of this broadcast has further meaning, namely this, that the time of your life, my life, our lives, is right now, in the present moment, the only known moment of life you're living, which can be supremely satisfying and liberating. The experience of presence that can be so empowering, so enriching when we can bring ourselves there and stay there entirely in the wholeness of our nowness, body, heart, mind, spirit. When such moments are frequent and flow together, it enables us to make much more often, the most of our fleeting time on earth, of our wild and precious selves and days and lives. So, for this shared hour or under of discovery, I've summoned up a tasting menu of cultural commentary, poetry, thoughts, and inquiry. Where it leads you, us, here and hereafter, we'll find out. And we're going to begin with man-made time in a moment, but I wanted to say, by the way, that opening piece was a poem of mine, scored to original music, composed by Jacob Friedman, part of a whole poetorial that I created as a lead cultural contributor to the 2017 America's Cup yacht races in Bermuda. That's all up on my site, also, if you're interested, at thepoetorialist.com. Among other poetorials, you'll see there sampling. It was a body of work that included poem awards for each of the competing sailing teams that I made through the Truce Foundation of the United States, where I've served since that same year forward as poet laureate, and plan to be involved again in the International Olympics, as I was for the winter ones a couple of years back, but around the coming Summer Games in Japan and Tokyo. So more on that as it unfolds. So, about time, as most first conceive it or perceive it, what does Wikipedia tell us about time? Time is the indefinite, continued progress of existence and events that occur in an apparently irreversible succession from the past through the present into the future. It is often referred to as a fourth dimension, along with three spatial dimensions. It has long been an important subject of study in religion, philosophy, and science, but defining it in a manner applicable to all fields without circularity has consistently eluded scholars. Nevertheless, diverse fields such as business, industry, sports, the sciences, and the performing arts all incorporate some notion of time into their respective measuring systems. So, we have this well-known chronos time, very linear, very limited, and can be quite limiting by this definition. we're measuring everything that way. But in a bit, we're going to talk about Kairos time, Kairos. Well, let's stay in the man-made frame for a moment, or this construct, which it is. And Galileo was the one who invented split-second time for the public on a private scale that took decades. Well, over the century that followed his invention, the pendulum clock, 100 times more accurate than any preceding technology, became a staple of European life and forever changed our relationship with time. In his book, How We Got to Now, Steve Johnson says it this way: accurate clocks, thanks to their unrivaled ability to determine longitude at sea, greatly reduced the risks of global shipping networks, which gave the first industrialist a constant supply of raw materials and access to overseas markets. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, the most reliable watches in the world were manufactured in England, which created a pool of expertise with fine tool manufacture that would prove to be incredibly handy when the demands of industrial innovation arrived. Just as the glass-making expertise producing spectacles opened the door for telescopes and microscopes, the watchmakers were the advance guard of what would become industrial engineering. To be a romantic at the turn of the 19th century was in part to break from the growing tyranny of clock time, to sleep late, ramble aimlessly through the city, refuse to live by the, quote, statistical clocks that governed economic life. The time discipline of the pendulum clock took the informal flow of experience and nailed it to a mathematical grid. If time is a river, the pendulum clock turned it into a canal of evenly spaced locks engineered for the rhythms of industry. That's very important to underscore as we're going to talk through some of this and feel through some of this from different perspectives. Every time you glance down at your smartphone to check your location, you're unwittingly consulting a network of 24 atomic clocks housed in satellites in low Earth orbit above you. Like the naval navigators of the 18th century, GPS determines your location by comparing clocks. This is, in fact, one of the recurring stories of the history of the clock. Each new advance in timekeeping enables a corresponding advance in our mastery of geography. From ships to railroads to air traffic to GPS, it's an idea that Einstein would have appreciated. Measuring time turns out to be key to measuring space. This is a strange paradox of time in the atomic age. We live in ever shorter increments, guided by clocks that tick invisibly with immaculate precision. We have short attention spans and have surrendered our natural rhythms to the abstract grid of clock time. And yet, simultaneously, we have the capacity to imagine and record histories that are thousands or millions of years old, to trace chains of cause and effect that span dozens of generations. We can wonder what time it is and glance down at our phone and get an answer that is accurate to the split second. But we can also appreciate that the answer was, in a sense, 500 years in the making, from Galileo's altar lamp to Niels Bohr's cesium, from the chronometer to Sputnik. Compared to an ordinary human being from Galileo's age, our time horizons have expanded in both directions, from the microsecond to the millennium. Brain Pickings tells us that Virginia Woolf, the writer from England from the past, was acutely and intimately conscious of the strange elasticity of time, something she contemplated not only in her novels for the public eyes, but also in the privacy of her diary, where she lamented, "Life piles up so fast that I have no time to write out the equally fast-rising mound of reflections. I want to appear a success even to myself, yet I don't get to the bottom of it. It's having no children, living away from friends, failing to write well, spending too much on food, growing old. I think too much of whys and wherefores, too much of myself. I don't like time to flap round me. Well then, work. I wonder why time is always allowed to harry one." So, I have a key question to ask ourselves right now: why we let clock time, artificial time in its way, subdue or subvert or enslave us. Aside from keeping appointments and catching planes, meeting deadlines, and all of those things, I have since learned to go on my energy, not on the clock or by the clock when I don't have to, which is a lot of time, so to speak. I don't. So Here's an example you might relate to, kind of classic for me in my book. You're at a dinner party at your house or someone else's house, and you and everyone are having a fine time, a lively time. Along the way, later on, someone says or asks, as they invariably seem to do, what time is it, or what time it is? And it's far later than anyone realized. 1 a.m., let's say, or 1:30. Immediately, you've had to have had this experience, or you will, that the energy in the room deflates like a balloon. Just that's it, goes all the air goes out of the room. People suddenly feel exhausted, tired. I have to go home. Well, doesn't that show us things? And on the other side of that, I held a Poetry on the Plate immersive dining experience, which I do from time to time, either commissioned or host them myself and invite people. And I did it a couple springs back, and the theme was the Table of the Gypsies. It was an incredible evening. There were 24 guests of all different kinds, from all different places, 5 courses, interwoven with music and imagery and anecdotes and poetry and much more. And the guests arrived at 6 o'clock. We began with special cocktails. At one point, as we were going along, many courses on, I said to the chef, we ought to bring dessert out. What do you think? And she said, well, I think so because it's 2 a.m. I couldn't believe that. I would never have guessed that. I announced the last course to everyone, was just sitting there floating, happy as could be, having the best time. Time was immaterial. No one cared about that it was 2:30. No one wanted to leave, but we all eventually had to go to bed, and at around 3 o'clock, we all floated our ways home. So you see how powerful the mind is, and how one kind of time, sort of psychosomatic belief about time, can rule it. We don't have to let it rule us that way. So I always say of such evenings and occasions, don't tell me the time or the hour. Doesn't matter. Let's just go with the flow. Billy Collins has this poem. I think about watch yourself and others and how clock time runs you, or pressures you. No Time is this piece by Billy Collins. In a rush this weekday morning, I tap the horn as I speed past the cemetery where my parents are buried side by side beneath a slab of smooth granite. Then, all day, I think of him rising up to give me that look of knowing disapproval, while my mother calmly tells him to lie back down. I like how the writer Mary Sarton wrote about navigating life's seasons and our own spirits during those seasons of life. She said to get better at wintering, we need to address our very notion of time. We tend to imagine that our lives are linear, but they are in fact cyclical. Well, she befriending this cyclical rhythm of our inner lives, she observed, was the key to wintering, to emerging from the coldest seasons of the soul, not only undiminished, but revitalized. We are in the habit of imagining our lives to be linear, she said, a long march from birth to death in which we mass our powers, only to surrender them again, all the while slowly losing our youthful beauty. This is a brutal untruth. Life meanders like a path through the woods. We have seasons when we flourish and seasons when the leaves fall from us, revealing our bare bones. Given time, they grow again. Isn't that lovely? Mary Sarton. Well, now we come to Kairos time, non-linear time, expansive time. And I'd like to share a few thoughts by several interesting people that I follow in different ways. And one is an applied mythologist, Michael Meade. I've actually brought him up at other times. Then a conscious dream guide, the Australian author Robert Moss. And then the human potentialist and mystery school founder Gene Houston on Kairos versus Chronos time that we were talking about at the opening. Here's Michael Meade's point of view. Currently, the world is beset by a cascade of crises that seem impossible to solve. Yet the situation can also be seen as what the ancient Greeks called a kairos period, a betwixt and between time in which the course of history changes, and all of reality seems to be altered. Things become both impossible and more possible at the same time as life transforms on many levels. A kairos period often begins with crises that break time open and break down our usual patterns of life. Although radically disorienting, such moments can be transformative, even revelatory, as hidden potentials of life become more visible. In that sense, Kairos can be seen as, quote, awakened time, moments in which we can awaken to a greater sense of the world and our place in it. Thank you, Michael Mead. And echoing that a bit and adding to it is Robert Moss. Kairos is jump time, opportunity time, the special moment that you seize or miss. In Kairos moments, you may feel you have been released from linear time, or that powers from outside time have erupted, I-R-R-U-P-T-E-D, into your world. The Greeks personified it as a young, fleet-footed god, completely bald except for a curling lock falling over his forehead, hence the phrase, seize time by the forelock. If you meet this fellow on the road and fail to seize the moment, you'll find him very hard to catch. Kairos is slippery. It, in Greek, he said, has related meanings in two interesting contexts, in archery and in weaving. In archery, it means an opening in the specific sense of a long aperture through which the archer must make his arrow pass. As Odysseus at the start of the battle with the suitors must fire an arrow through the holes in a dozen axe heads to prove himself. Meeting the test of this kind of kairos requires fine precision and the force to drive the arrow all the way. In the art of weaving, it is the moment when the weaver must draw the yarn through the gap that opens just for that moment in the warp of the fabric that is being woven. And Gene Houston, who says, we are all living in a kairotic time when the portals of probability open and anything can happen or can be brought into happening by us. Chronos, chronological time, yields to kairos, loaded time, the moment of fundamental possibility. Well, I have a feeling, based on those observations, that we are in such a time. And may we and you find and live in more such kairos time. Maybe this is a kairos era for us in a larger way, in a global or societal way, if we're not already in the midst of it. And to let it be transcendent and transformative. Oh, kairotically speaking, we can also be time travelers. I feel as a poet, I am one. I'm sure other poets do and writers, able to slip the moorings at will of time and move in all directions, imaginatively, feelingly. This is a poem I wrote a couple of winters back called The Time Traveler. But it has a really interesting image. If you're interested, you let me know. I'll send you the whole pairing. The Time Traveler. One who can swim backward and forward in time. Sing into the distant past and be at ease there among ancients, relics, antecedents. Flash far into the future and mingle, spangle with its possibilities, its other realities. Who can even suspend the hour and minute hands of the moment's clock and travel blithely, spaciously into timelessness. Here's another from another winter. This one was in Sag Harbor. It was a musing on this unbound time, the experience of it, and the inviting and choosing of it. It's called I Don't Wear Time. On my sleeve, there's only the ticking of the heart beating deep within this chest. The silent clockwork syncopations of this circadianly rhythming body. The unseen chronology of this life hourglassing from time past to all these wonderfully, slowly passing moments of present. What is your place of timelessness that you've experienced either regularly or a place that you've gone to in your life or traveled to? I'd often be in a deliciously timeless place whenever I went every winter for many, many years, in a free-floating place of being in the Yucatan on the Mayan coast. And this is a taste of that. It's called Tear Here. You see this picture-perfect day. Breeze-brushed frond shadows tickling the sand. Pelicans pirouetting through the sea-salted air. You feel the indolencia of this free-flowing space south of the world. Clouds miming the slow somersaults of sea. No traces of clocks or calendars. Follow that faint line dotting the water's edge. Just tear here and file this day away in a drawer of your memory for future reference. thinking of the beach made me a little thirsty. There's much to be said for stillness and what it offers us, including contemplation. And on the summer solstice of 2016 is this poem, The Day the Sun Stood Still. Today, a day unlike any other, past or future. Not because the sun will stand still at the Tropic of Cancer, then reverse its northerly arc and head radiantly south toward the Tropic of Capricorn. Not because a full moon, a native votive strawberry moon, will, just once in most of our lifetimes, rise on the same plane. Today is a day unlike any other because it's a new day of light, lightness, rareness, wonder, open to one, to all. A day where our own stillness can greatly illuminate, where we can choose to move likewise, clock or counterclockwise, in phenomenal directions, can invoke a fresh season, infusion, green summer of self, bring ripening to our life seeds, fruits, vines, visions, connect more deeply, simply to the earth, to the purely elemental, shining inside, around, and above us. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote this: life goes headlong. Each of us is always to be found hurrying headlong in the chase of some fact, hunted by some fear or command behind us. Suddenly we meet a friend. We pause. Our hurry and embarrassment look ridiculous. Now pause, now possession is required, and the power to swell the moment from the resources of our own heart until it supersedes sun and moon and solar system in its expanding immensity. The moment is all, in all noble relations. So this difference that we've read about, know about, at least in our minds, even if we don't always practice it, but the difference of being physically somewhere and being fully, let alone deeply present there. Mark Nepo says in his book of Awakening, wherever I cannot bring my entire being, I am not there. I live by that. I it's something to consider. Wherever I cannot bring my entire being, I am not there. Well, this next poem I would like to share is about that. And to me, a place to always seek. It's called Deeper Presence. Means, happens, many fathoms below merely being here, simply showing up for. It's total immersion, connection, correlation with each place or person you engage with. Nothing surface or shallow, only substance, and transcendence through all your self-distractions, self-absorptions, where you bring, feel, and are felt as a deeper, freer, and clear as a mountain stream presence in each moment. Deeper presence. All right. Let's think about nature a bit more for a moment. And it's such a great teacher about so much, isn't it? And that includes some wise ways of living, or wiser ways of living, just by observing how it goes about itself. So this is a piece. Why have I? Sorry, but I thought I had written her first name down, but it's May. I'll come back to that. And it's talking about this notion. Most trees produce their buds in high summer, and the autumn leaf fall reveals them neat and expectant, protected from the cold by thick scales from the sharp talons of the beech to the hoof-like black buds of the ash. Many trees also display catkins in the winter, like the acid-green lamb's tails of the hazel and the furry gray knobs of the willow. These employ the wind or insects to spread pollen ready for the new year. The tree is waiting. It has everything ready. Its fallen leaves are mulching the forest floor, and its roots are drawing up the extra winter moisture, providing a firm anchor against seasonal storms. Its ripe cones and nuts are providing essential food in this scarce time for mice and squirrels, and its bark is hosting hibernating insects and providing a source of nourishment for hungry deer. It is far from dead. It is, in fact, the life and soul of the wood. It's just getting on with it quietly. It will not burst into life in the spring. It will just put on a new coat and face the world again. Well, I, like other poets today and through time, am inspired by the natural world, and not least by trees. Many poems about them and for them. This is one from Morristown, New Jersey, back in May of 2017. It's called In Slow Motion. It was a wonderful woods and pond, kind of a Walden pond for me. And I love sitting down there and walking there and feeling into it and composing in slow motion. These oceans of trees, currents of luminous green leaves overhead, undulating in deep hypnotic swells and sarabands of wind and limbs. These eternal wavings of light and growth, of high living presence, grace in slow motion. Which also ties into my whole philosophy of slow living, slow everything, slowing it down. So we even started by talking about racing and then slowing. Back in the summer of 1998 in the east of Holland, deep in the countryside, I had this experience, ephemeral yet indelible, and it's a touchstone for me whenever I come to it, which I did as I put material together for us for this broadcast. It's called Dalfsen. It's from Dalfsen in the Netherlands. Summer. You step back in time through a Paulus Potter landscape. A serene green table of beds lapped with layers of Delft blue air and antique clouds of milk and cream, water, windmills, and grazing cows rolling out beyond view. What happens when we let go of time? In moments like that, you just drink in the essence of every who or what you have around you and before you. Stop looking at the clock. Stop living by the clock. Here's a meditation for you. Maybe close your eyes for a moment, as you may have just done on that other one. Maybe they're closed throughout as you listen. And be here. Here, this is from the Yucatan. It's called Todo bien. All is well. Today you take a siesta in the shade, surrounded by a sun-glazed sea. Your thoughts drift on the endless waves, on the passing clouds. Like shells, your ears catch the music of the surf and the palms, rustling like loose pages in the wind. You've forgotten the date and indefinitely the hour. Todo bien. On why time slows down when we're afraid, speeds up as we age, and gets warped on vacation. There's the BBC broadcaster and psychology writer Claudia Hammond in her book Time Warped, Unlocking the Mysteries of Time Perception. And she says it's something we might be able to shape and benefit from. We construct the experience of time in our minds, so it follows that we are able to change the elements we find troubling, whether it's trying to stop the years racing past or speeding up time when we're stuck in a queue, trying to live more in the present, or working out how long ago we last saw our old friends. Time can be a friend, but it can also be an enemy. The trick is to harness it, whether at home, at work, or even in social policy, and to work in line with our conception of time. Time perception matters because it is the experience of time that roots us in our mental reality. It is not only at the heart of the way we organize life, but the way we experience it. The key to what she calls reminiscence, she says, is the reminiscence bump is novelty. The reason we remember our youth so well is that it's a period where we have more new experiences than in our 30s or 40s. It's a time for firsts. First sexual relationships, first jobs, first travel without parents, first experience of living away from home, the first time we get much real choice over the way we spend our days. Novelty has such a strong impact on memory that even within the bump, we remember more from the start of each new experience. You are most likely to remember the timing of an event if it was distinctive, vivid, personally involving, and is a tale you have recounted many times since. Well, looking at time through yet another prism is Dan Falk, and on the science of mental time travel, shedding light on the cognitive rudder, he says, that allows our brains to navigate the river of time. His book is called In Search of Time. Interesting book. He says, without it, there would be no planning, no building, no culture. Without an imagined picture of the future, our civilization would not exist. The capacity for mental time travel gave our ancestors an invaluable edge in the struggle for survival. They believe there is a profound link between remembering the past and imagining the future. The very act of remembering, they argue, gives one the, quote, raw material needed to construct plausible scenarios of future events and act accordingly. Here's a poem by Gary Soto, S-O-T-O, that resonates for me, and maybe you, around our theme of the time of your life. It's called Devising Your Own Time. I can set the clock 5 minutes ahead, just enough to give me a head start, a fair chance on legs that are water and bone. I could set the clock back to, say, 7 minutes to 9. I miss a flight, and the plane goes down among black Angus cows. In my house, none of the clocks is right, each with its own metallic breathing, its own oily click of sprockets and spools, springs with the leap of a feisty frog. I keep 6 watches in our tansu, occasionally holding them like lizards, all with their hands up in surrender. I tell my wife, I'll cook for you, and shake my sleeve to examine my Timex. I throw a pumpkin into a pot, a pumpkin that I measured with a smile, 3 teeth, a wedge-shaped nose. I boil this fat boy fruit and lose track, my mind collapsing like a pumpkin in boiling water. I pace the house, another measure of time, my steps like a sick man in a robe. I watch the shade move across the lawn and the leaf swing from a poor-postured elm. These 2 are time, and my cat's meowing at the door. To tell you the truth, I'm losing confidence. In my heart, I know it's 10 to 10, that I'm somewhere in my 40s, that the calendar has gutted most of January, that my watch is panting on my wrist. Maybe I make my flight, and my watch hurries because it's time. In the field, a cow chews its cud, indifferent to the idleness of the dead. Thank you, Gary Soto. Frank O'Hara also has a poem that I felt spoke to the time we've lived, what we're living right now or can. It's called In Favor of One's Time. Frank O'Hara. The spent purpose of a perfectly marvelous life suddenly glimmers and leaps into flame. It's more difficult than you think to make charcoal. It's also pretty hard to remember life's marvelous. But there it is, guttering, choking, then soaring in the mirrored room of this consciousness. It's practically a blaze of pure sensibility, and however exaggerated, at least something's going on, and the quick oxygen in the air will not go neglected, will not sulk or fall into blackness and peat. An angel flying slowly, curiously singes its wings, and you diminish for a moment out of respect for beauty, then flare up after all. That's the angel that wrestled with Jacob and loves conflict as an athlete loves the tape, and we're off into an immortal contest of actuality and pride, which is love assuming the consciousness of itself, as sky all over all medium of finding and founding, not just resemblance, but the magnetic otherness. That stands erect in the spirit's glare and waits for the joining of an opposite force's breath. So come the winds into our lives and last longer than despair's sharp snake, crushed before it conquered. So marvelous is not just a poet's greenish namesake, and we live outside his garden in pure tempestuous rites. At the same time as we live our mortal lives, we are in a natural world. I mean, we are nature, part of nature. I think sometimes we forget that, as if it's something outside us. But there is in the natural world around us something far more timeless and unbounded and enduring. And to get in touch with that, I think, is that kind of eternalness in its way, enduringness is important. And I have those experiences, and definitely did up in the Inside Passage of Southeast Alaska some years back. And this moment in this poem, then green clouds, Green clouds lie along the surface of our coastal passage. Clouds of conifers, of Sitka spruce and cedar, shore pine, hemlock and alder, that change shape by decades instead of days, by generations of snow and light, that share the shelter of their deep-rooted solace with the water, the earth, the birds, and sometime passing men. There's a book that you might, if you don't know it, might find very interesting. It's by the artist Andy Goldsworthy. It's called Time. And it chronicles the extraordinary work of that British artist who, for the past 3 decades, has been defying the Western art tradition of creating work that outlasts the artist's lifetime by instead creating marvelous temporal, very fleeting sculptures out of leaves, twigs, petals, ice, sand, feathers, water, stone, and other fragments of nature. And if you don't know these, they're these ephemeral lyrical miracles of their kind that he's done in Canada and Mexico and Japan and Scotland, Holland, and many other places, that he creates them, and of course he documents them, or leaves them open to the forces of time and change. And so this book has like 500 really marvelous photographs of these creations, most that he took himself, paired with meditations. So have a look at that. Because it is about also the nature of time itself, the beginning of the universe, and many other things. I was thinking about time and for us, and I was thinking about sort of the beginning, the ways time has, some parts of time have beginnings and endings, not all, but the end of time. And Mary Rifle has a poem called Kiss of the Sun. If, as they say, poetry is a sign of something among people, then let this be prearranged now between us while we are still peoples, that at the end of time, which is also the end of poetry, and wheat and evil and insects and love, when the entire human race gathers in the flesh, reconstituted down to the infant's tiniest fold and littlest nail, I will be standing at the edge of that fathomless crowd with an orange for you, reconstituted down to its innermost seed, protected by white thread in case you are thirsty, which does not at this time seem like such a wild guess. And though there will be no poetry between us then, at the end of time, the geese all gone with the seas, I hope you will take it and remember, on earth I did not know how to touch. It was all so raw, and if by chance there is no edge to the crowd or anything else, so that I am of it, I will take the orange and toss it as high as I can. Thank you, Mary Rifle. Also, W.S. Merwin, if you don't know his poetry, worth a dip, has his own musing also about the end of time. So my question to you is, what might yours be? What might your scenario or image or vision or imagination be about it? In Time, this is called. The night the world was going to end, when we heard those explosions not far away and the loudspeakers telling us about the vast fires on the backwater consuming undisclosed remnants and warning us over and over to stay indoors and make no signals, you stood at the open window, the light of one candle back in the room. We put on high boots to be ready for wherever we might have to go, and we got out the oysters and sat at the small table, feeding them to each other first with the fork, then from our mouths to each other, until there were none, and we stood up and started to dance without music. Slowly we danced around and around in circles, and after a while we hummed when the world was about to end, all those years, all those nights ago. Here's a... I might pass on this because I want to keep us in a certain time frame. But another time I'd like to read you John Ashbery's poem. It's called Vetiver, V-E-T-I-V-E-R, from his collection April Galleons. I'll save that for another time. Patti Smith, I've spoken of her before, and she has this commentary on age, on points of life, time, our sense of our own chronology and trajectory and place in time. She said here, I considered what it meant to be 66, the same number as the original American highway, the celebrated Mother Road that George Maharis as Buzz Murdoch took as he tooled across the country in his Corvette, working on oil rigs and trawlers, breaking hearts and freeing junkies. 66, I thought, what the hell? I could feel my chronology mounting, snow approaching. I could feel the moon, but I could not see it. The sky was veiled with a heavy mist, illuminated by the perpetual city lights. When I was a girl, the night sky was a great map of constellations, a cornucopia spilling with the crystalline dusk of the Milky Way across its ebony expanse, layers of stars that I would deftly unfold in my mind. I noticed the threads on my dungarees, straining across my protruding knees. I'm still the same person, I thought, with all my flaws intact, same old bony knees. The phone was ringing, a birthday wish from an old friend reaching from far away. As I said goodbye, I realized I missed that particular version of me, the one who was feverish, impious. She has flown, that's for sure. Is real-time time uninterrupted? Only the present comprehended? Are our thoughts nothing but passing trains, no stops, devoid of dimension, whizzing by massive posters with repeating images? Catching a fragment from the window seat, yet another fragment from the next identical frame. If I write in the present yet digress, is that still real time? Real time, I reason, cannot be divided into sections like numbers on the face of a clock. If I write about the past as I simultaneously dwell on the present, am I still in real time? Perhaps there is no past or future, only the perpetual present that contains this trinity of memory. I looked out into the street and noticed the light changing. Perhaps the sun had slipped behind a cloud. Perhaps time had slipped away. Thank you, Patty Smith. Well, we can choose to enter each moment, that trinity, and otherwise afresh, with an innocent eye, an innocent heart, and alter our otherwise usual or expected or familiar or autopilot experience of the world around us and within us. I'd written this for a young lady on her 16th birthday, but I feel it applies to all of us. It's called You Arrive Now, at a New Beginning. Each thought creating a reality, each day calling you to listen to your inner wisdom, there inside and growing. Each moment opening to a place of greater possibility, discovery, sensibility. Each choice forming a fascinating present and future. Julia Denos, D-E-N-O-S, in her illustrated book on living with presence called Here and Now. Nice title. She says, meditation is just another way of noticing, and a little bit like magic. It brings us just as we are into the present moment, just as it is. This freedom is a place I call Here and Now. It is a land well known by young children and plants and animals. It is a place and a possibility root, a place where we feel connected to the greater unfolding story. Sometimes when our minds and bodies are busy, we forget how to get back. But all we need to do to return again is to notice the world around us. We don't need to sit down or stop what we are doing. We don't even need to close our eyes. Let's open our senses instead. Well, I greatly encourage the opening of all senses, inner and outer. And here, of course, in our conversation or our sharings, to let time loose as often as you can. Unleash yourself from it, partly as a freeing, as a liberating, but partly as a daydreaming. This was from Cyclades, from the Aegean, the island of Kea, August of 2012. It's called Time Unwinds. On a Cycladic island afloat in the Aegean, time unwinds, suspends. First and second hands move to untime, to poet time, soul time. The rhythm of life reverts to a simple arc of sun, to expressions of light, progressions of shadow, to long forgotten, now remembered rhymes. The great Stoic Seneca, I felt, absolutely belonged in our mix of inquiry because he focused on the existential calculus of how we spend or waste the sliver of time allotted us along this continuum of being. Well, he, in his final years, he counseled a friend this way. Set yourself free for your own sake. Gather and save your time, which till lately has been forced from you or filched away, or has merely slipped from your hands. Certain moments are torn from us. Some are gently removed. Others glide beyond our reach. The most disgraceful kind of loss, however, is that due to carelessness. What man can you show me who places any value on his time, who reckons the worth of each day, who understands that he is dying daily? For we are mistaken when we look forward to death. The major portion of death has already passed. Whatever years lie behind us are in death's hands. Therefore, hold every hour in your grasp. Lay hold of today's task, and you will not need to depend so much upon tomorrow's. While we are postponing, life speeds by. Nothing is ours except time. We were entrusted by nature with the ownership of this single thing, so fleeting and slippery that anyone who will can oust us from possession. What fools these mortals be! They allow the cheapest and most useless things, which can easily be replaced, to be charged in the reckoning after they have acquired them, but they never regard themselves as in debt when they have received some of that precious commodity, time. And yet time is the one loan which even a grateful recipient cannot repay. Thank you, Seneca. Wouldn't it have been interesting to sit and have a conversation with him? Well, we're kind of having it, but in a way, but it'd be nice to have him physically with us in this time, in this moment. Annie Dillard, some of you may know about her. This is from The Writing Life. She says, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. What we do with this hour and that one is what we are doing. A schedule defends from chaos and whim. It is a net for catching days. It is a scaffolding on which a worker can stand and labor with both hands at sections of time. A schedule is a mock-up of reason and order, willed, faked, and so brought into being. It is a peace and a haven set into the wreck of time. It is a lifeboat on which you find yourself decades later, still living. Each day is the same, so you remember the series afterward as a blurred and powerful pattern. There is no shortage of good days. It is good lives that are hard to come by. A life of good days lived in the senses is not enough. The life of sensation is the life of greed. It requires more and more. The life of the spirit requires less and less. Time is ample, and its passage sweet. Who would call a day spent reading a good day? But a life spent reading, that is a good life. A day that closely resembles every other day of the past 10 or 20 years does not suggest itself as a good one. But who would not call Pasteur's life a good one, or Thomas Mann's? Thank you, Annie Dillard. We're coming down to our sort of last stretch. So, shall we be as much shapers of time and our time as shapees, as being shaped by it? Maybe food for thought for you. This is a poem called Here You Are. In the world, in this curiously wild and wildly curious place, not only the wider one spanning blue oceans and white deserts, distant countries and quilted cultures, but all the other ones, animate and intimate ones, of life and work, friends and family, of the rare body of energy and beauty you live in, move and grow in, of the realms of dreams and feelings, soul and mystery, that shape your days, your nights, the moments of your being, the heart of your becoming. Ursula Le Guin has a hymn to time. Time says, let there be. Every moment and instantly there is space in the radiance of each bright galaxy, and eyes beholding radiance, and the gnats' flickering dance, and the sea's expanse, and death and chance. Time makes room for going and coming home, and in time's womb begins all ending. Time is being, and being time. It is all one thing, the shining, the seeing, the dark abounding. Thank you, Ursula Le Guin. Damas Omorin, Irish man, Irish poet, has salad days. We were not green in judgment or cold in blood like Cleopatra in her youth, who still was ordering chopped radish in her bowls back then, the hearts all gone to pieces next to the winter greens that in our days we never had use for. So smitten were we with fire and ovens that I was gravy in judgment, which might not mean much unless you've taken a spoon of it and poured it back over a dumpling shaped like your heart, so that it became even softer, something you could not have thought possible. It's all happening now. you liked to say, and I agreed, though it was not the news from the outside I relished, but the daily extra, extra, the light of the morning brought to my attention every time we woke in your house or my house, and my heart, salty, risen, was warm again in a way it hadn't been for years, organ of passion, organ of righteousness that has never had a single flavor across its lips. How could you know how much I would miss the honey of those days? Her drizzle of it on the turkey bacon, my cracking pepper up and down the pan, the sweet meat of happiness I would no longer let pass between our teeth. Well, what is my refrain or encore to these? It's this: let's make hay while the sun shines. Make song while our voices shine. Make love while our bodies shine. Make feasts while our appetites shine. May each day be bright with heart, come rain or shine. All right, well, last for now, for our time together now. Let's make our way through all of life's time as hopefully, as beautifully, as lively as we can, shall we? This was a summer solstice poem from Westport, Connecticut, June of 2019. It's called This Bridge. It was written out on the Long Island Sound. This bridge. The one we all cross to more light. A bridge made purely of sun and earth. Nowhere to be seen, only sensed. A brief but beautiful crossing, worth looking out at the world from. Looking at your moment in life from. From this bridge that spans our way to another season of fruitfulness. Opens us to what's above and wide around us, without closing off all that's passing underneath. That suspends us in air like birds or clouds, anchors us in the bedrock of nature, holds us in a great balance and presence as we journey through our lengthening and shortening time. Thank you again very much for listening in, for floating, thinking, and feeling in. Appreciation, too, to those enthusiasts lending their support to these programs and my poetic arts, committed to nourishing spirits and uplifting hearts and opening doors to greater self-awareness and aliveness. If you'd like to donate, you can easily do so in any amount by PayPal or Venmo or directly through my site or by mail to me at P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island 02891. As always, I invite inspired patrons to bring me their way for a month or longer this summer or fall as a private poet in residence on their property to create a new flight of work to share with and dedicate to them. And I welcome connecting with like-spirited collaborators to explore new creative projects and partnerings with, from the musical to the theatrical. Also directors and others in search of a poetic narrator. Your comments, questions, suggestions, always encouraged. Email Colin at thepoetorialist.com. Replays are online for re-listening, for sharing. I hope you'll lean in again next week or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to having the best and fullest time of your life, to engaging time in unclocked, unchecked ways, to making the most of the time you have, the gift of time that you have. Carpe diem, carpe momentum. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.